Hello, everyone. My name is Shon Williams. You may know me as the host of the Safe Room podcast. And today we're doing something very special. It's going to be a special interview that I have with Jackee Kasandy. She is the founder of the BBC Society and Kasandy Inc. And I'm so happy to have this interview with her. Because, Jackee, how are you?
I'm doing so well, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's a little hot outside, but I know we're gonna push through this interview, and I'm really gonna learn a lot about, the conversation we're about to have.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on to your show. I'm really excited to be interviewed by you. I'm in Vancouver, so of course it's nice and warm here, but not as hot as where you are. So I'll count my blessings.
All right, that sounds perfect. I do want to get a quick background on yourself before I get into some of the main questions I want to ask you, just for anyone who's listening, just to
Hmm.
know who is Jackie, the work that you do specifically. So
Yeah,
I would like for you to just give a quick overview of just the things that you do.
excellent. So my name, as Sean said, is Jackee Kasandy. I am an immigrant from Kenya who's been a Canadian for about 20 years now. I live in Vancouver, the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And my background is in corporate. I was in the corporate world for about 15 years. I quit that and started my business that I've been doing for about 8 years now. And as a result, born out of 2020, COVID and the George Floyd activation that was going on, I founded the Black Entrepreneurs and Businesses of Canada Society, which goes by BBC Society. And it was founded to advocate for Black entrepreneurs in the country. So we serve about 2,000 Black entrepreneurs around the country. And we do quite a bit of work there in terms of everything that a Black business would need to start, scale, and grow. And the other side of that is I run my own business, which is Kasandy Inc. I have a store on Granville Island. I've been running that for 8 years, and we have a website as well. So yeah, my life is busy, but it's really good.
Well, it's good to know that you're a very busy individual, especially the work that you do for the BBC. And I would know because I am part of the team. So, a little fun fact for everyone knowing there. And it's an amazing team of individuals. And I'm just so happy to be able to have this interview with you and talk a little bit more about the topic we're going to get into, which is the United Nations. Now, I know this is something that's kind of came up very recently for us. And there needs to be a lot of things that need to be addressed, and I think there needs
Hmm.
to be things that had to be like taken into accountability. So maybe you can go into detail just a little bit the overview for some people who may not know just the backstory behind the United Nations, how it all started and what we're trying to advocate, what we're trying to get across.
Right. So right now, part of the work that we are doing is mobilizing Canadians in support of the Black Canadian community. We are organizing for urgent action. Basically, we want to support permanent legislative policy for Black Canadians. And this is coming about because of something called the United Nations Decade of the People of African Descent. So I'll go into the background, but I want to talk about why this is important first before I go to the background of how we got here and then back to why this is important. So this is important because it would be a doorway into the government permanently for the Black community. We would have a permanent seat at the table to be able to contribute to solutions and the decisions that are being made and programs that are being made so that our voice is heard at the table and that the policies and the programs and anything that the government is working for the whole country, that those programs would work for our community as well. And also it's just to have our space at the table because all the other equity seeking communities, our indigenous brothers and sisters, our LGBTQA plus brothers and sisters, persons with disabilities, veterans, all the other equity seeking groups actually do have a permanent legislative policy, and the Black community is the only one that doesn't have these policies. So a bit of a background on how we got here. So I have a beautiful niece. Her name is Maya. She's 12. very smart kid. And this year, well, actually last year, starting last year, but into this year especially, during Black History Month at school, they were learning about Black History Month as they do every year, but most of the Black history that they learn is American Black history. So this year she took it upon herself to mobilize and ask her teacher, going, wait, why can't we learn about Black Canadian history? And if you don't have any books and stuff like that, here's suggestions of books that I have read and people that I have learned about that we can bring into the education Canadian Black history. And so she came and she's telling me this story, and I'm looking at her and I'm so proud of her. I'm like, oh my God, my niece, she's 12 and she's activating. She's bringing change to her school where she sees that she needs change. Fast forward a little bit, I've been doing this BEBC work and I've been engaged in talking to other leaders in the community, leaders in government, federal, provincial, and the rest of them. And one of the programs I got engaged in got me introduced to going to conferences in different places. So I went to a conference in Nova Scotia and I went to another one in Edmonton. And I got to meet a lot of Black serving organizations and people from government. And during that work, I started to learn more and get engaged more into UNDPAD, which is the International Decade for People of African Descent. Out of that, in June of this year, I got invited to go to the United Nations with the Canadian delegation. And so we were there, and I was among 900 people from around the world, Black people, advocating for us in the community. And that was a life-changing experience. And so coming back, because the UNDPAD ends next year, it's a 10-year program, or rather 10-year engagement that ends next year. My question back to Canada, which was the question we all were taking back to our countries, was what happens next? So let me provide a little bit of background information. So what is UNDPAD and how did we get here? So UNDPAD is a program that comes after a different program, or rather a different activation that happened back in 2001. So Black folk from around the world met in South Africa and Durban. In 2001, they came up with a declaration program of action. And this program of action that they declared in 2001 was very simple. It was basically advocating for persons of African descent, and they were asking for investments in the health system, education, housing, electricity, drinking water, basic things that everyone else has for people of African descent around the world. They were asking for access to education, to new technologies, in particular for women and children. They were asking for the inclusion of history and contributions of Africans and people of African descent in education curriculum. This ties me back to my niece. That's what she was asking for. But she didn't know that the Durban Declaration actually existed. Most of us in the Black community don't know that the Durban Declaration that was asking for our contributions, or Black people's contribution in education curriculum existed. And that happened in 2001. Fast forward to 2014. So in 2001, Canada did not vote in support of this declaration. Canada and the US did not. The rest of the world voted, but only 6 or 7 countries didn't vote for it, and Canada was one of them. Of course, people of African descent continued to push at the United Nations. In 2014, 13 years after the first declaration, finally the United Nations established the International Decade for the People of African Descent. And we in Canada might remember the International Decade of people, the Indigenous people. So this was a version that was for Black people. And it was basically a consultative mechanism for people of African descent and other stakeholders, just a seat at the table, as it were. And then out of that, in 2021, which is 20 years after the first time Black folks started advocating for these very simple, basic things, the United Nations finally established a permanent forum for people of African descent, which means they gave people of African descent a seat at the table permanently at the forum. And so they had the first session in 2021 in Geneva, and in June, me being in New York at the United Nations General Assembly was the second session. And so this one brought together hundreds of academics and representatives, organizations and countries and human rights institutions and so civil societies, all manner of Black people to advocate for us for those simple things that we started to ask for in 2001. And so that actually brought all of this into mind for me, going, wait, okay, so I know in my sphere of influence, actually a lot of people don't know about this, whether they're Black or not. We Canadians don't really have a full of an understanding of what the Durban Declaration is, what the UNDPAD is, and how that impacts us as a country, us as a people, and us as a Black community. So let's go back and do a quick history. 2001 Durban Declaration. Canada votes against it in 2001. 2015, the International Decade of People of African Descent gets established. Canada doesn't sign on to it until 2018, which means that's 4 years later. We're 4 years late by the time Canada comes along. And then, as we all know, 2020, George Floyd gets murdered, COVID happens, the world changes. And so at that point in 2021, Canada established some programming for Black community, which was great. It's the first time this was happening, and I'm very pleased that our government actually did that. And so they established the Black Entrepreneurship Program, which was 30 million given to Black organizations to operate this fund, with 100 million committed in non-government granted loans for Black entrepreneurs. They also gave $100 million to different many Black organizations to serve the community, to help make a change. They also provided 6.5 million specifically to research the Black community, because if you look at StatsCan and all that, very, very, very little data exists about Black people, Black entrepreneurs, and all of that stuff. And then there was also a program which is supporting Black communities, granting program, which was 25 million. If you put all of those things together, the money that actually got into the community is about, let's say, 250 million. But all of them were temporary programs. They started in 2021, they're ending in 2024. All of them, every single one of them actually ends. Now, UNDPAD also ends in 2024. So if this program was 10 years and Canada has only engaged in it in 5 years, and in those 5 years, only in the last 2 years was there any programming for Black community, the question now becomes, what happens next? So if UNDPAD is coming to an end, is there a legislative policy, a permanent legislative policy for Black Canadians as a result of UNDPAD? Like, what's the Canadian government actually going to do in support of Black Canadians? Can they answer us that question? What are the recommendations that came out of UNDPAD? What happens with that? The employment equity measures and the recommendations that came from it, what happens with that? Will Canada sign on to allow another decade for people of African descent? Because we still have a lot of work to do, and Canada engaged only in the last 6 years, with actual programming only in the last 3 years. So Canada owes us a bit more time, and establishing a permanent forum at the United Nations so that Black people always have a seat at the table. So if Canada is going to sign on to those things, shouldn't that also happen for us within the country, where we also have a permanent doorway into the government so that we can advocate for the Black community, we can engage with all the other communities in doing the work? So what is Canada going to do? And that's basically what we're trying to do, what the mobilization is for the communities, to educate the community about what this is, the importance of it, and why we are seeking from the government some answers. Basically, what happens now? Will the programming that was put in, that was temporary, will that be made permanent and with funding put in there? Because there's a lot of work to do. And so right now we just want to ask every Canadian, really, you don't even have to be Black, help us ask this question of the government. What happens now that the UNDPAD program is ending? And can the Black community also, like all the other communities, have a permanent legislative policy in the government? And so to go For the government to listen or to hear us, we need to all of us mobilize. We need to write letters. We need to tag them. We need to make videos like this and have ask this question. You need to talk to your local MP and say, hey, what's going to happen in support of Black community? What's going to happen for the Black community? And we deserve a seat at the table like everyone else. And is that going to become a thing? And so me interviewing with you right now is so exciting because it's nice to kind of educate people on what this program is go back and really talk about the importance of this legislative and why we need it. We need a doorway into the government that's going to be permanent, that's going to give us a seat at the table, that's going to make us equal to other groups that also need a voice in the government and they've been able to be given a permanent seat at the table. How was that?
I mean, I had more questions, but you kind of hit the little one take button on that. So thank you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and ask the questions. I can
I
clarify
mean,
a few things.
no, I think you said everything perfectly well, and I just wanted to add my personal take on it because I do
Mm-hmm.
see
Yes,
the
please.
importance of everything that you said right now, especially when you talk about like what happens next. I think really it behinds like following up. Especially when you look at information, how it's always disseminated or how it's pushed out. There's always the issue behind that something's done, but there's never really a follow up to that process. So whether it's run its duration for a project or even a policy or even everything that you mentioned before, it has been where there's been a lot of gaps in between and
Mm-hmm.
not that much work that we were hoping or what was supposed to be done has been
Yeah.
accomplished. So it
Yeah.
leaves a lot of people in that position where what's going to happen next? I mean, it was rejected in 2001. It didn't kick in about over a decade later, and then Canada didn't get into it till 2018. So
Mm-hmm.
even with all those gaps, you think about like the questions that go in my head is just like, why was it rejected the first time? Like, what caused such a long drought to get to that
Mm-hmm.
position? What happened in between that gap that caused
Mm-hmm.
the change from
Right.
it being rejected to okay, we're now going to try to do the UNDPAD now to even then where it's like okay, it's established, but we'll
Right.
sign on like 3 years later. So there's a lot that in between that needs to be answered. But even like you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
before, in the latter years, when in 2021 you had like the first session, and then 2023 as well, the first session was in Geneva in 2021, and then in 2023 was just June. So
Yeah.
again, there's a lot to kind of take in, and from
Mm-hmm.
that, I see where a lot of people find that issue of we don't know what's going to happen next because it was supposed to be 10 years and you
Yeah.
can only really say that a fifth of that was
Yeah.
really accumulated or accomplished. So
Yeah.
now is there going to actually be like a legislative policy for people of African descent or for like black entrepreneurs, black businesses that allow for them to see this process continue? And I
Yeah.
think,
Yes.
it becomes a question like if there's going to be something like that, who gets a seat at the table? Where's that representation going to come from? And if there's going to be representation, how much are you going to get of that? Is it going to be a large portion? Are they going to be the ones that make it the decisions for this? Are they going to be the
Mm-hmm.
ones that get to advocate like the highest when it comes to the situation?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to really unpack, but I think what you really did a great job is really telling the full story. I love how you started with your daughter because sometimes it's something as little as that brings an entire narrative together. And like for
Mm-hmm.
me, I just wanted to like really hear you because I think for someone myself being like a young black male, someone who has a business that I'm running, I think it's really important because again, it's all about education, knowledge
Yeah.
mobilization. A lot of times
Yeah.
we don't know these things are happening. It feels like it's
Yeah.
either has to do with like exclusivity or accessibility to certain resources or certain tools.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted for you to just like say everything. And again, like I had other questions, but I really mean it. You really covered everything to a T, and I'm really glad you did. Kind of makes my job a little bit easier.
No, I have to say it's such a joy talking to you. You're a young black business owner. You're going through the things that the government needs to be addressing right now. You've benefited from some of the programming that came in, even in the littlest way, right? In the different conversations in different organizations you've gotten into. It's good, but it's been very small. So for you to actually continue to engage, we were talking about the mentorship program that you're going through right now with one of the Black leaders. For those kinds of programming to continue, it needs to be permanent. A lot of the things that brought the program that you went into, that brought you into the mentor, they're ending. They're ending at the end of next year. The funding is ending. And so if the funding is ending, what happens? Like, are they going, even just as a result of UNDPAD, can they make those programs permanent? Can they extend them? Because these are the only programs we have for the Black community at all. And if we get a permanent legislative policy, that actually helps with the programming. So it doesn't have to be the specific ones. I think the most successful one is they're supporting Black Canadians. It's called SBCCI. That has been really successful. So if the government could make that permanent, make it more long lasting, I think there'll be a greater impact in the Black community. And this is an issue beyond, I mean, we Canadians are so nice. This is an issue that all of us can engage in. Like, how do we mobilize? And as we're saying, we're going to have a website, we're going to have a change.org, we're going to be on social media. We want everyone, Black people, non-Black people, allies, to help us send the letter to the government, to help add their voice to what we're doing and ask this question for us as well. Going, well, this Black Canadians are my brothers and sisters, and where's their permanent legislative policy, right? The Indigenous group has a whole ministry. The veterans and the LGBTQ and all of that, they have secretariats. They basically have someone at the table. I mean, the government is huge and they're dealing with lots of things. If you're not at the table, a program might come through and then we find that we don't qualify for it. Not because the government didn't make it so we don't qualify. It's just there wasn't someone at the table who could speak from our point of view and what our experience is to help those programs be formulated in ways where we can also engage in them. So the
Yeah.
government doesn't do anything because, hey, we want to exclude this group. No one actually, not no one, in my experience, I don't believe anyone in Canada comes from that space. But it's important if you're at the table to help craft solutions with a point of view from each community so that when the program is actually put out, it works for all of us, not just some of us. And
Yes.
so, and that's why it's so important to just be at the table, and the permanent legislative policy helps with that. And so, we am asking all of us, every Black Canadian, every non-Black Canadian, to engage with us and sign the change.org and send letters to the minister and engage in democracy. You know, I always remember Barack Obama when he started and when he won and he went into office and he said, "I'm in the office now, but I can't do it by myself. You have to help me do it. You have to make the legislators do the work." And
Right.
so mobilizing is basically us helping them, saying, hey, this is important. Hey, we have this question. Hey, can you hear us? And then that will bring it to the parliament, to the table, and then they'll talk about it. But if we don't do that, they won't realize that it's a priority for us. And there's so many other priorities. So you can understand that they're working on other things and we're left on the side. And so
Yeah.
this is just our way of saying, hey, this is important. We'd like some answers. Can we get some answers? And the more voices we have to ask this question, the better. And our politicians are good. They listen and then they work with the community. And so this is just our effort to do what Barack Obama said and to, yes, we can. So let's go and do it.
I like that. I really like that. You did mention, there's different ways that people could, push out this message, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
like letters or like just posting this or even learning more. And I think I really want to emphasize on that learning aspect. So maybe for
Yes.
some individuals who maybe this conversation that we're having, they want to get a little bit deeper into context,
Mm-hmm.
do you kind of recommend a good way to kind of know more about the backstory about the UND pad, how everything's come
Yes.
to be? Because I know there are some individuals who may be on the younger side, and I know there's a lot of young entrepreneurship for Black individuals, including myself, that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we may not be able to resonate with stuff that happened back in 2001. Sure, we can
Yeah.
follow up with the latter years, but it's like you got to know a little bit more. So maybe for you, again, you kind of seen everything kind of played out over the years. So do you kind
Yeah.
of recommend anything that people could look up that allows
Yeah.
them to get a little bit more of that consciousness in terms of the situation?
Yes, so we're gonna put it on our website where we're gonna have the background information, how we got here, a very simple explainer, and we'll have an activation letter there. So it's as simple as copy, paste, and send the letter to all of these ministers, and we're gonna have the email addresses there. We'll have a change.org. The change.org will have that background information as well that people can read. But I think it's important for the background information because honestly, we Canadians, black and non-black, don't really know any of this that has been happening, which is true as well for the indigenous community. But they activated, they mobilized, and they got the programming and all that good stuff, which is great. And I'm proud of that. And so we learned from that, and so we are basically just replicating the process for the black community, just so we are all at the table. So our website, so we're going to have our website, which is bbcsociety.org. Hopefully we'll include the links down there where people can go and get the background information, copy and paste the letter to their representatives, and sign the change.org.
All right, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you for the conversation. And to anyone listening again, I would strongly advise that you take action, use your voice, and use your platform to touch upon the situation. Again, we want to make sure that we're having that representation as a Black community because our
Mm-hmm.
voice matters. And I do believe what should be the UNDPAD, it needs to be extended so that way there are the different programs that are accessible for Black businesses, Black entrepreneurs. And
Mm-hmm.
again, we do see that there's such a rise in Black entrepreneurship as the years go by, especially coming out of the pandemic. So there is a precipice to see how people want this work to continue, and I think it's important for us as Black people to take at the forefront of this
Yeah.
issue and make sure that it's being elevated, making sure that this is continuing on. So again, Jackie, I just want to say thank you for coming on, for sharing your story, sharing the background, because I really think this is an important topic.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm so proud of you for everything that you do. Your podcast is awesome. The business you're doing is awesome. You're activating for the community. I'm so proud of you, and I'm inspired by you and the things that you're doing. And for everyone else, thank you for watching us and listening. And share this information with anyone. If the minimum you could do is just share with anyone, that helps us. That helps add your voice to our voice, so that we can get some change happening. Thank you so much, Sean. It was good to see you.
Absolutely. Thank you for everyone listening, and we'll see you guys next time.